So how did a previously quite successful populist party in Japan just explode into itself and implode in a series of petty feuds and personality fallouts? This is despite the fact that it was previously the Conservative Party of Japan, seen as a somewhat successful minor party and emerging threat into the Japanese political scene. Well, I think to understand that, you have to sort of go back and look at the past few years of the party's history to understand how we got here. So a few years ago, in 2023, a man called Naoki Hayakuta had a fairly simple dream and ambition, which was to form a party to the right of the existing governing party of Japan, the LDP. Now, for decades, the LDP, despite being a conservative party, sort of governed from, I'd say, the centre-right. Now, this is despite in the past having, somewhat quite conservative leaders, like, for example, Shinzo Abe, who had, at times quite conservative instincts and conservative beliefs. For example, he very much wanted to shift Japan to the right and change the sort of the consensus when it comes to Japan's military and shift Japan further rightwards in that direction. But despite that, he often compromised and governed from sort of the centre-right, as I say. That's for understandable reasons. For one, for years the LDP were in government with partner Komeito, who was sort of a centrist Buddhist party. So arguably that sort of anchored them a little bit in the centre and stopped them becoming too conservative. Also, the LDP had numerous factions. Some were more conservative than others. And also, when you're the LDP and you're the natural party of government, you're in power for decades and decades. With only a few breaks, and most of your opposition is sort of either in the centre and to the left, you can understand why they'd sort of park in this sort of centre-right territory rather than moving further right. But Naoki Hayakuta, as I say, I think he saw a little bit of an opportunity here in that if there's no one to the LDP's right and they're leaving all this vacant space, that leaves a spot for a party to come up and form and challenge them and sort of take votes and challenge the LDP to their right. Now, he didn't do this overnight. He was sort of a prominent author and a political figure without entering politics. He was sort of a governor of NHK, the state broadcaster of Japan. But he vowed in 2023, if Japan passed the LGP Understanding Act, he said he would form his own political party. Well, the act passed, and sure enough he did, and he formed the Conservative Party of Japan in 2023. Now, this party had a number of strengths. One was the leader itself, Naoki Hayakuta. As I say, he's sort of a celebrity figure. Someone who's known for his novels and for being a governor, which gives him a little bit of, you'd say, credibility, being a governor of NHK, a bit of profile in politics. And as I say, he's someone who would go on Japanese TV and has a little bit of a profile. That has hurt him at times. He'd sort of maybe sometimes say things you would say are controversial. Like, for example, recently he made comments which he would say were speculative, where he was talking about ways you could improve the birth rate, and he said some sort of quite dramatic things like not allowing women to go to university, and more extreme things than that. But he would say they were hypothetical. But nonetheless, these sort of statements get him a bit of attention for that sort of reason. Also, as I say, historically, there's not really been a party very much challenging the LDP on their right. They've sort of been able to sew up that position. So there was a bit of a vacancy for him to come in and challenge things, like I say, the LGBT Understanding Act, and sort of pitch himself to sort of more conservative voters in Japan who maybe feel like the LDP aren't catering to them as much. And also, the Conservative Party of Japan had a distinct profile in that when you compare it to another party that was to emerge, Sanzeto, the party's support base tended a little bit older, and also fairly male. So sort of a typical Conservative Party of Japan supporter would be a man in his sort of over 50. So that gives them sort of their own sort of distinct voter profile, separate to Sanzeto, to go after and target. It gives them a bit of a natural demographic base. And also, the party had a very natural support base in Nagoya, which will come up later. But basically, they were able to entice the former mayor of Nagoya to join the party. And he already had something of his own sort of a political setup and a sort of a regional base of power in Nagoya. And so this lent them a strong regional base. It lent them immediate support to have this sort of, as I say, structure, and politicians who already existed in Nagoya to join the party immediately grew the party. So those were some of the strengths the party had. Now, as I say, early on, the story for the Conservative Party of Japan was one of success. They formed in 2023. In the 2024 election, a time when you would argue the LDP was suffering from credibility issues due to a couple of scandals, for example, the church scandal and the slush fund scandal. And they had a new leader, Shigeru Ishiba, who was sort of more of a centrist candidate. So one, the reputation of the LDP was a bit damaged by these scandals, and two, they had sort of a centrist leader, and so this opened up an opportunity for the Conservative Party of Japan, as I say, to market themselves on the right, appeal to sort of disaffected LDP supporters, and they did I would say, reasonably well in the 2024 election. They got 3 seats in that election, the same amount of seats as Sanzeto did in the same election, getting 3 seats in the lower house out of, I believe, 465. So that gave them sort of a launch pad, a presence, and for a sort of a first election, a sort of their coming out election, I'd say that's a solid, respectable result for a brand new party. And they, as I say, established themselves as a national party. And from there, they sort of went a little bit from strength to strength. As I say, they had this regional power base in Nagoya. And so when the former mayor of Nagoya, as I say, had sort of left to join the CPG and become one of their politicians, but his deputy for years ran to replace him. And as a result, he was elected the sort of former deputy mayor of Nagoya. And as I say, he had the natural claim of having been the deputy for years to a fairly popular mayor who'd been in office for a while. And so it was quite natural that he did fairly well. That's sort of what you'd expect. But that meant that on paper, Nagoya elected the Conservative Party of Japan candidate, the deputy mayor in, which meant that they effectively had won a major city. I believe it's sort of the 3rd or 4th city of Japan, Nagoya. And so that was quite a coup for the Conservative Party of Japan. Obviously, it owed much to this sort of regional connection in Nagoya, the fact that they were able to win such a major city, but on paper, it was a big victory for them. And sort of maybe is sort of here the early seeds of where things would start to go wrong. Like on paper, it's a big accomplishment, but it's down to the strength of the local political connections they had, and the tradition of the mayor of Nagoya who left to join the party is sort of what won it for them. And so you could sort of see how that would maybe create a little bit of tension in terms of who gets the credit and who's the more prominent figure in the party when the major success is coming from Nagoya. They went on in the upper house in Japan's elections in 2025 to also have a credible result, which is not as good as Sanzeto did. Sanzeto, I believe, got something like 14 seats, and it was really their big breakthrough election where Sanzeto got a lot of national media attention. People were talking about them and the threat they possibly posed to the LDP, but CPJ didn't do as well as the Conservative Party of Japan. They're maybe, by comparison, falling behind the Sanzeto party a little bit to sort of make the claim as being the biggest, sort of populist party that's going to target the LDP on the right. And I think this is sort of their zenith, unless things change, the hot water mark of the Conservative Party of Japan. And it's from here things sort of started to go wrong. And it appears there's been a little bit of a fracturing, a fallout, where some of the members of the party have sort of been have left the Conservative Party of Japan now because of defections and fallouts and fused of some of those Nagoya politicians, as I say, becoming disaffected and leaving, and they've sort of gone backwards and lost representation. And so now, and also this gives the public impression that the party can't hold itself together, it's fractured, and that it's going backwards. And so sort of effectively the local Nagoya party is now sitting in parliament on its own behalf, and it's not part of the Conservative Party of Japan anymore. Why did this feud happen? Well, as I say, I think my personal opinion, is that it's an element of when you have two big outspoken personalities, which the mayor of Nagoya, I think, was. He had his own claim to having like sort of a base of power in Nagoya, and he's sort of someone who has a presence is sort of as a big regional politician. And then on the other hand, you have Naoki Haikuta, who's a very sort of, I suppose you could say, eccentric, outspoken, big personality. You could maybe say when you have two people who both on their own right maybe command attention and would both want, sort of respect and recognition, and are both sort of big personalities, maybe it's sort of often hard for people like that to work together and sort of coexist. A good example of this is maybe Elon Musk and Donald Trump, an example of two sort of quite powerful people who are sort of outspoken big personalities and who struggled to exist together and in the end had a big fallout. And I think maybe, in my personal opinion, there was an element of a personality clash, but also there was maybe a little bit of a political difference that went into this as well. I think the Nagoya party was maybe more of a strict sort of tax cut, we'll take less tax from you party. That was sort of their political belief. Whereas, as well as them, of course, wanting recognition for themselves and their status as a Nagoya party. Whereas I think the Conservative Party in Japan was maybe more focused on sort of, as I say, things like the LGBT Understanding Act, promoting themselves as like a sort of a strong traditional Japanese like sort of nationalist party, and less about things like tax cuts necessarily. And so, as I say, they've now had this big falling out, and that leads the Conservative Party of Japan, as I say, to a position where it's not only lost ground, but it has some weaknesses compared to where it was just a couple of years ago when it formed. For one thing, as I say, they were targeting voters to the right of the LDP and traditional LDP supporters. But now the LDP, since then, it's moved away from having a centrist leader, Shigeru Ishiba. It's now voted in Sanae Takahashi, who's very much more of, a natural conservative, someone who markets themselves as like a little bit of a Margaret Thatcher Iron Lady figure who wants to appeal to natural conservatives as well and move the party to the right. Because of that, the centrist party Komeito left the coalition with the LDP. So you could argue that maybe the LDP now has a more naturally conservative leader. It's unanchored from Komeito, who perhaps are more centrist, and sort of we're tying them to sort of the centre-right. And now they have, as I say, Sanae Takahashi, who's sort of quite popular, doing well in the polls. She's getting in polls things like 60, 70%, and maybe bringing back the old sort of disaffected voters who are looking to parties like Sanzato and the Conservative Party of Japan. And possibly she might look to bring them back in the election that's going to happen soon in February 2026. So it'd be interesting to see how she does. So maybe she's sort of bringing those old disaffected traditional supporters of the LDP back, and she's closed off space to exist on the right a little bit, where the Conservative Party of Japan would be hoping to thrive. On top of that, as I say, it's very fractured. It's seen as having this public feud. It's lost support. It's lost this natural base in Nagoya because they've effectively left the party and they're now operating on their own as sort of a Nagoya party. So they're not going to be running for the Conservative Party of Japan in the next election. They're going to be running on their own account, it looks like, possibly. At the very least, they've left the party Conservative Party of Japan. So in that sense, it looks fractured. They've gone backwards and they don't have many politicians running for them, and they don't have this natural base of support in Nagoya anymore. In addition to that, as I say, Sanzato in the 2025 election did very well and captured a number of seats. So to the extent that there is any space sort of to the right of the LDP, which is in question post Sanae Takahashi, maybe Sanzato are occupying that space by being the more exciting party, the party that grew more in the last election. And also, they sort of, the Sanzato made a little bit of a pitch explicitly to Conservative Party of Japan voters. They didn't say that out loud, but at one point during the campaign in 2025, Sanzato described themselves as the LDP of the good old days, i.e. if you used to be an LDP supporter, but you feel like the LDP is not for you anymore, it's drifted away, it's not on the right anymore, we're the party for you, and the good old days, that terminology, it very much markets itself as what you would think the natural supporter base of the Conservative Party of Japan, which is, as I say, older voters. So it's not just sort of younger online supporters, younger people who are a little bit disaffected, which is maybe what you'd think of as the traditional Sanzato party support base. As I say, they came out of COVID and sort of took a stance against COVID, and they're very much a sort of a strong online party with an online presence. And so maybe in that respect, their natural support's a bit younger, but they're maybe explicitly now going for sort of older, disaffected LDP voters who, as I say, either might drift back towards the LDP now with Sanae Takahashi, or they'll possibly look to Sanzato as an alternative. And so because of that, the party's maybe been a little bit boxed out by these two parties who have sort of occupied the space they were looking to occupy to the right of the LDP, and they sort of had this very public feud and gone backwards in a number of seats. So for that reason, I'd say they've sort of effectively imploded, and they're quite fractured, they're divided, and they have these problems now. And so I think it'll be very, very interesting to see how they do in the 2026 election. That might have caught them unawares because it was something of a snap election. And it'll be interesting to see if they lose further ground or if they're able to hold on to sort of their vote share they had last time, if they're able to continue their status as a national party, or if they can recover from this. And if it goes really bad in the 2026 election, it might even be the case that they sort of fold or might not continue to exist. That's pure speculation, but it'd be interesting to see where they go from here and if they can sort of recapture the earlier energy and narrative they had and national attention, and rebound from this sort of, as I say, schism and implosion they've had within the party. But for that and a number of reasons, the 2026 election is going to be very interesting, and it'll be very interesting to see where the Conservative Party of Japan goes from here.